All right, we are on air. Happy Thursday, everybody. It is June 12th. We are celebrating the return of Backdrop Day, which will happen weekly every Thursday, meeting at 1 p.m. Pacific, and followed usually by a sprint, which is exciting. Last week, as you all probably know, was DrupalCon. You guys were in Austin, maybe. We were in Hawaii, so the meeting didn't happen. We're back with a vengeance, and looking forward to get this wrapped up and released soon, which is kind of exciting. So we are working on Backdrop CMS, and we're doing it because we believe that there's a cost that comes with change and that not all of the existing Drupal community will be able to make the move to Drupal 8. So we are producing a system with Drupal 8 comparable features on a Drupal 7-like architecture, the big idea being that it will be easy to migrate existing websites or upgrade existing websites from Drupal 7 to Backdrop, and it'll be really easy to port existing Drupal 7 modules to Backdrop as well. So hopefully we can help keep the costs down in terms of development hours towards getting code updated as well as building websites out. Along the way, we're going to be fixing bugs, as in bugs that were already in Drupal 7 and need solutions, fixing bugs that were fixed in Drupal 8. We want to make sure we have those same solutions into Backdrop, and any other bugs that we find along the way. And other things we're going to be working on that are less urgent, I suppose, are simplifying existing systems, and that is where we don't require very much API change to do so, and also adding new features. So making sure that our software continues to move forward with technology is important. We think we can do that quickly if we aren't worried about changing the underlying code. Our timeline, we're hoping to release Backdrop in July, which is right around the corner. So we need a little bit of help getting this final push done, which I think we're pretty close. We've got some great new features in, and we're doing a lot of tidying up on major systems too. So I think we can do it. We're gonna need some more hands. So if anyone has any friends with any free time, we can tap them to get this all done. That would be great. So we are, in terms of our progress support, we've got some major things that are going to be 1.0 release blockers. You may have noticed in the last 2 weeks that we released Backdrop's new logo and identity. So on our Google Hangout, our Twitter, our Facebook, our website, our GitHub project, anywhere we had a logo that used to be a drop, we've now replaced it with a new square, which is the Backdrop logo. It's also in the agenda if you want to see what it looks like today. Along with our new font for the logo. So we're going to be working on a complete website redesign that includes this new branding at some point in the future, probably after Backdrop 1.0 comes out, because that's going to be our focus right now. But we are trying to move away from Drupal. We want to move away from the drop because we think that will be a little bit too similar. So we've got this new idea. I think it's really cute. It's like you can kind of see underneath the thing that there's another thing, which is exactly what we're working on. We're the engine behind the website, and it's a fractal, which is awesome. And I think Darius, who designed it for us, did a really great job. Kind of fits exactly to what we're thinking about with clean and simple and just kind of getting the job done. So it fits the software as well as the brand, which I think is great. Other things we're working on a blocks and layout system. That's probably the biggest piece of the puzzle left to be done. And we're going to try and get as much as that done as we can. I'm not sure it's going to be completed by the 1.0 release, but we should at least try and figure out what APIs need to be in so that we can add interfaces on top of it. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes in the next month and see how close we can get. Views is in core. We've got some conversions left to get done, so if anyone wants to help with views conversions, there's a bunch of those. CMI is also done and also needs conversions. So if anyone wants to help with those conversions, we need to get those done before we can release too.
Yeah, to elaborate on that, I think the CMI stuff is actually the biggest blockers that we've got. I mean, like things like converting, content types and fields hasn't yet been undertaken, and that's probably like the largest chunk of like, we have to finish this because we can't release Backdrop 1.0 with like CMI and it's kind of like halfway done state right now. Like the underlying system is all there, but yeah, we need more conversions. Until we get everything converted, I'm not really sure that we could release. So that's going to be our biggest holdup. If we don't get blocks and layouts done, we could release without it, but config management we need to get completely covered.
Okay. So maybe Andy, if you've got free cycles in the near future, and myself as well, our backdrop interns are gone this month. We'll get one or maybe two of them back starting July 1st. But I think that maybe we should try and see if we can get moving on some of these CMI conversions and following some of the documentation that's been done. And I know contact module just got converted. We can use that as a guide. Maybe we could kind of put our heads together and figure out how to churn through some of those.
Yeah, I mean, the list is real finite, actually. I mean, there's like a dozen things, basically.
Yeah. But some of them are going to be sticky.
Yeah, some of them will be a little bit sticky. But I think for the most part, it's not actually as difficult as it may appear. It's basically removing database queries and putting in config file saves instead.
Okay. All right. And then other stuff we're working on, we've got a bunch of cross ports from Drupal 7. I think these are mostly done. Most of the final meta issue, I think, is even in a pull request that I need to clean up a little bit, which will be good. And then we've got this most recent issue that just contains all of the changes, I think, between 7.2.4 and 7.2.8. That's also mostly done. So we should be able to wrap those up this week. So hopefully Drupal 7 will be done. The Drupal 8 backport list, I've removed the 4 giant metas that were on here. I think it's better for us to work through these lists in terms of the things that are most important rather than looking through every single issue and trying to figure out if we want the commit or not. So I know, for example, we're going to need the CMI conversions. We're going to need the views conversions. We're going to need like the CSS and JavaScript cleanup. Those are the issues that we already have. But there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that we don't necessarily need. It would be great if we had the time to look through these 7,000 issues and figure out which bug fixes we should just port over. But considering the amount of time that we have left, I think it's best to just focus on the things that we know we need. We can make metas for things like views conversions and then compare those. Even if we can't use the patches, we can still work through the same list of things to make sure that we're not missing anything that was included in Drupal 8. So if we manage to get those done, then we do have 7,000 issues we can review and pick and choose the ones that are most important. I know for me, every time I run into a bug with Drupal 7, like I'm working on a client site and run into a problem, I'm like, this thing is broken, and then there's a solution, I'll go and write an issue for that for Backdrop and try and get it in. So I think we're going to be kind of doing that for a while until we can get the most important bugs done, or at least the ones that we know about. But I think that in terms of the amount of time that we have left, focusing on most important things first is a priority. And bug fixes we can also always get in after the release. So that's something to think about. Okay, other things we've got going on. Minor projects. We are working on separating the identity of Backdrop from the identity of Drupal. We've done a huge service in terms of getting a new logo in, which is great. We've got an issue in the queue. This is actually higher up because it is a release blocker, so it's higher up in our agenda. But there's an issue in the queue to replace the word Drupal with the word Backdrop in the code. We've got a pull request on it. I've reviewed probably 75% of it. It's really, really long. I'll probably finish up that review today, and then if we could get someone else to review it too, we'll need another rebase by the time it's ready to go in. But I think that that's going to be huge for making the code not say Drupal, which is going to be great. And then we've got some other stuff too in terms of separating the identity. Making the administration theme look different, I think, is also important, so that if someone is looking at, the admin content node page on a Drupal site and on a Backdrop site, they'll be able to tell which one's Drupal and which one's Backdrop. And we've got some really great work going on in a style guide that can help us kind of decide what we want our admin theme to look like. It's not going to change very much from 7 because we really like 7, but it does need to not look exactly like 7. So we might change the fonts and the colors and some basic things as much as we can. We might choose a different icon set than Drupal 8, but having something that looks different from Drupal 7 and different from Drupal 8 I think is going to be really important for us long term, so we're not just the same but different. So we've got those things underway. And then user experience improvements, we need to add a rich text editor. I think it would be great if we could focus on that. I think that might even be more important, maybe not more important, comparably important with a blocks and layouts thing. It's definitely, I think, an easier piece to get in than blocks and layouts. So at some point we might try and figure out what our resources are and where it would be best to spend what we have. But I think it would be slightly embarrassing if we released Backdrop without a rich text editor. So that's on the agenda as well. And then there's some terminology updates. Those should be quick and simple. I think the more of these patches we can get in before we change terminology, the better. So I'm leaving that for the last. We've got a lot of stuff that we're merging in from Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, and keeping it the same would be good. And then, of course, deciding which of those are most important and which ones are nice to have but not necessarily important would be good too. So we'll review that here in a week or two. And see if there's anything that we should just cut from the list, and other stuff that might be too controversial. And then the theme system cleanup. We've been doing a lot of work on that. I took a bunch of my Backdrop interns and gave them theme system cleanup stuff to work on. We've already got some of the patches committed, which is great. We've got some new stuff underway, consolidation of template files, removal of template files that aren't necessary. I think we're making great progress on that, and the things that are left are the trickiest things, like adding new theme hooks and removing the process layer. And I think those should, I've got branches with work on all of those things as well. So as soon as we can get tests passing, I'll get some pull requests in for those. So I think we're making good progress on all fronts, which is great. We have a section of this meeting for updates from the PMC. We haven't had any issues escalated to the PMC. So we don't have any updates, no blockers, no updates, which is great. We are also looking to expand the PMC, so we're going to be keeping an eye on people's activity in the issue queue, or people who are talking about Backdrop but maybe aren't producing code are also just as valuable. So if you are interested in being involved in Backdrop decision making, show up and voice your opinions and make sure that we know who you are and what side of the page you're on a lot of issues, and you'll be in contention. So just keep that in mind. And then there's also a bunch of other stuff that we need to work on. We need an API site. I think that's fairly important. I actually have a Drupal code base with code committed to it, so it's underway. We need to get, I think Luke had volunteered to set up some content types for us on the server where that's going to live. So I'll follow up with him now that we actually have a Drupal site he can work on, which will be great. And then we also need an update server. I think that can come probably shortly after we release Backdrop, because we won't have anyone needing to run updates until there are any updates. So we need to have the update server before the first update, but maybe not before 1.0.0, before 1.0.1.
Yeah, we need to
so in terms of priorities, that'll be number 2. But I think we need the API site first, so people can get to 1.0.0. And then we're going to need an official GitHub service so people can register their Backdrop projects. And I think we've got kind of a good plan for how Contrib is going to work, where we're going to have a Backdrop Contrib group on GitHub. So anyone who wants to write a module will just be part of this group. Well, we'll need to be inducted or nominated or something. We'll figure it out. And then they'll be able to post their modules there, and those modules will be included in the official Backdrop modules. And then additional modules can be registered to Backdrop modules, but they won't be supported or official or whatever until they get. We'll figure something out. But we have a plan. We just need to figure out language and how to make the plan happen. So I think we're on the right track for that. But we will need a GitHub service. And I know that we've had some people thinking about that a little bit, but we should maybe get serious about that too. And then our primary website, we talked about doing a little redesign with a logo and font. That'll again come after the 1.0 release. We also want to add a showcase as soon as we have websites to showcase. So it'd be good to get them up there so people will know that this thing is for real, which I think is pretty good. We've got a couple of sites in mind that might be good to add to the showcase. We're going to be upgrading the Drupal 7 site that is backdropcms.org to Backdrop, which I think will also make a really good case study. So having some place to put those up would be good. And then, of course, we'll need pages to list our modules and themes that are aggregated by our GitHub service, which doesn't exist yet. But I think that all this stuff is less urgent than getting the project ready. So we'll focus on that first and then build all the stuff around it after it's out. So today, after this meeting, we'll be around for half an hour, and then we need to run out for an errand, but we'll be back again this afternoon. So if you guys want to start, we can do some brainstorming on most important things that need to be sprinted on, and then come back and help catch things up, get our pull requests passing, get tests running, and then leave, and then come back, and they'll all be passing. It'll be great. But so every Thursday after this meeting, we have a little sprint. Today will be no different, and then we're going to have 2 sprints coming up in person at Drupal Corn Camp this summer in Des Moines, Iowa, and then at the Twin Cities Drupal Camp. So we're hoping that the Drupal Corn, which is July 17th and 19th, will either be like the week before the release or the week of the release. And then Twin Cities Drupal Camp will be just after the release. So we're hoping that Drupal Corn Camp will be getting a bunch of people helping us get stuff done, and then afterwards we'll be porting first modules to Backdraft. So, or if there are bugs, fixing the bugs. But hopefully we won't need a whole sprint room worth of people fixing bugs. So I think we've got a lot of exciting things in our agenda, which is really great. But yeah, I guess we should open it up to see if anyone else here has anything you want to add, or any questions, or any concerns, anything that we should address in this meeting.
Nothing.
Well, I think the contrib, I was posting an IRC, but I think the contrib needs to be sooner rather than later. So the XML RPC module needed to be updated to change the info file to require backdrop instead of core. So I pushed a pull request to that, which there's no response for. So in order for anyone to find anything or work on anything, there's going to have to be some directory of some kind pointing to what's out there.
So we have we've set up maybe we should take the modules that we have already and put them into this group, but we've set up a group on GitHub called Backdrop Contrib. Let's see. Backdrop. Where are you? Anyway, and so what we should do is we want to add anyone who's volunteered to be a Backdrop module maintainer into that group, and they can transfer their project to that group ownership as well. I think that's something fairly new with GitHub. I don't think you used to be able to transfer a project from owner to a different one. But what that does is it means that the project no longer lives at /user/project name. It lives at /backdrop contrib/project name. And that's basically the creation of an official GitHub project. And that means that anyone who's a GitHub or a Backdrop maintainer will then have the authority to do things like merge pull requests from other people. So it will kind of alleviate that bottleneck on like, oh, well, we have one person who volunteered to maintain XML RPC, but he wasn't around that week. If Nate and I are around that week, we can look at your pull request. So that, I think, is going to kind of prevent a bottleneck in contrib space, and it'll also help create a first listing of officially supported modules. So things that we've removed from core will go in there, and things like XML RPC will go in there. Anything that anyone is working on could be put in there. It's just that we need to have some process in place for like, oh, I'm writing X module, how do I make it official? That we haven't figured out yet. But I think you're right in that we need to set up this group so that people can find it, especially before we have that modules page where people can go to search, because GitHub is huge, and how do you know what's there and what's not? We already know a subset of what's there, and we can start by putting that all together.
So the workflow would be anything that's in that group, any member of that group can merge the pull request?
Yes. But I think that the way that we're going to organize it is that if you are a module maintainer, it will be like you're a subsystem maintainer for core, like you volunteer for this module, and that's the only thing you're responsible for. But if you find a bug in another module, you'll be able to fix it. So,
okay, so I started working on the City CRM integration, which there's a Google Summer of Code Drupal 8 project combined with the fact that City's essentially a standalone system that just has some level of integration through views and rules. So that port should be relatively easy. However, that module would exist within the City CRM infrastructure, not within, in order to be part of that group and be maintained by that group. So you have this issue where you're going to have existing groups that are maintaining code. Yeah. So I don't know if this plan to move everything under this contrib is going to work for an index of what exists.
Yeah, Jen, can I try and explain a different way? Okay, So here's the deal, Kevin, is that we won't need to put everything into this backdrop contrib group. It's basically kind of a way of you could say that the backdrop contrib group is kind of like a list of officially sanctioned projects, if you will. But
it's supported too. That's the big thing. Like,
yeah,
so there will be upgrade paths for those guaranteed.
Right, like basically group community supported modules instead of like just some random module that somebody wrote. Or in your guys' case, if there's another group that maintains a collection of backdrop modules, those would continue to live in some other group or some other location. Are you guys maintaining stuff on GitHub, or is it somewhere else?
Well, I mean, because we do stuff with Pantheon, everything has to eventually get to GitHub.
Okay.
So there's this back and forth with the benefits of distribution packaging versus the downside of everything else that's Drupal.org infrastructure. So we're doing both right now. It's not very efficient. There's a lot of back and forth and things get out of sync. But that's the way it happens right now. So CRM has its own collection, and then the community media stuff is done on top of that, going back and forth between the two systems. So right now it's a mess. It would be nice to clean that up, and so that's why I'm just trying to wrap my head around how this is going to play out. So really, there's modules that would fall under 3 different GitHub groups that already exist in this case.
Yeah. So ultimately, the actual like list of modules, like all of the available backdrop modules, will be listed on backdropcms.org, and they'll work the same way that like the jQuery plugins repository does, where in any GitHub repository, you can go to the settings for it and then toggle the integration with jQuery's plugin repository, and that just takes that repository and it automatically makes it available or lists it on plugins.jquery.com.
Yeah, I looked at jQuery's code base for doing that. They're using Node.js for that. So were you imagining that back-end service would be running on Backdrop with just basic REST?
The integration with GitHub itself, like the service that receives the GitHub notifications, and then I'm not really sure how that translates into Drupal, but there's a good chance that the service that listens to the requests from GitHub, like as actual events and actions happen, that would still be Node.js, just because it seems like that's generally kind of the preferred API integration for GitHub. Like our current system right now, where if you file a pull request, you automatically are granted administrative privileges on the issue queue repository. The issue queue repository doesn't have any code in it. It's just so that you can manage and like tag and categorize issues. We've got that service in place already, and that's already in Node.js as well.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm not really. We haven't figured out how that all integrates. But in short, you should be able to register any repository on all of GitHub with backdropcms.org and have that show up on backdropcms.org. So backdropcms.org will be the repository of all of the available modules. This idea that we have for having an umbrella group on GitHub for Backdrop Contrib is really for the management of those projects, to make it so that we can have a group of people that are, as a collective, responsible for managing and updating those projects. And if a module becomes, like, quote, abandoned, then it can easily be handed off to a different group of people without that module being stuck under that person's namespace. Like,
yeah, the canonical source, I think, is the major issue we're trying to solve, right? Where when someone forks a project, they get a copy of that project under their name, and then someone else forks it and they get a copy under their name. And when it changes hands, you don't want the source of that project moving around. So if we can say, like, the canonical source of this project is, backdrop contrib / I don't know, web form.
Yeah, a good example.
Then it doesn't matter if your web form maintainer, needs to take a year of sabbatical. It's not going to become backdrop.com / someone else web form. It's going to stay where it was, so you can just add and remove maintainers. But if you already have a group that's managing that project, so that it's at CivvyCRM / CivvyCRM or whatever it is, then you already have your own group of people where you can move it from place to place, and it doesn't become quite such an issue if somebody needs to leave for a year, someone else needs to come back. Now, if CivvyCRM were to disappear, that would be an issue. But I'm less worried about that than I am about, some developer building something once and then never coming back to maintain it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I hope that makes sense. In general, where the project lives, as long as it's on GitHub, isn't an issue. The only reason we're suggesting this backdrop contrib group is to make it so that we can deal with like abandoned modules or maintenance of modules like as a group instead of as individuals. Just because the individual repository setup on GitHub just really isn't, it's not really group friendly. It's like one person is kind of the king of the module, and that's not really what we really want out of our contrib repositories.
I think it'll also help create, like if you give people a sense of ownership over, like not only here, you created your own module, you already owned that, but also like, okay, you're in the group. We're giving your module this official status, which means you now take care of it, but you can help other stuff too. I think it'll kind of help foster the community a little more rather than being GitHub style where everyone's on their own. Just including them in this group and say you're part of the backdrop contrib group, I think will kind of help us create a little bit more of a community in an environment like GitHub where there isn't really any community to be had. So I think that'll help too.
Okay, well, I hope that answered the question for the most part, Kevin.
So I think the issue is that, at least what I think Kevin was bringing up, is that we need to figure out our GitHub service issue so that people who are working on community stuff, because my solution was like, oh, just put them in the group, but you bring up a good point that that's not a solution for every issue. If we can have that service set up sooner, that would be better for people who are registering that. And for the modules that we do know are going to end up in this group like XML RPC, we should do that too. But we also need to make it so that modules that aren't going to end up in this group have a way of registering. Even if we don't have a page on backdropcms.org that lists them all yet, giving a place for people to go, like a link that's like, this is the list of all of the modules that have made themselves backdrop services, even if that's just on GitHub, I think would be really valuable. Nate, will you talk to, was it Jared?
Yeah, Jared Bittner.
Yeah, about the GitHub service stuff.
Yeah, I'll see if he's got time available. He wrote our existing integration. Yeah, fortunately, it's all really pretty trivial. We already have a server set up that is like the continuous integration server that has Node installed on it. That's already listening to events from GitHub. It's just that it's not listening for a comprehensive suite of events at this point, which we need to expand out to integrate this for the project's repositories.
Okay. All right, and then I can take a look at the projects that we want to include already and see if we can get a subset running in backdrop contrib. I only set that up when we got the logo. I was like, I want to put the logo everywhere. I'm going to make other places to put the logo. But we didn't actually do any setting up of anything.
Yeah.
So we should make the list and get those on.
Yeah, pretty much good candidates for that is everything that we removed from core. Yeah. So the idea, I mean, the reason why we removed them from core was twofold. One was to reduce the complexity of core, and the second one was to make it so that we didn't have to maintain it we didn't have to convert it for the initial release of Backdrop. So we can put those into the contrib repository, but they won't be fully converted yet because one of the entire points was to make it so that we didn't have to maintain those modules. But yeah, some of them, like XML RPC, were basically already converted. Like Marcus did a good job of converting the XML RPC module, but now he shouldn't be the only one responsible for that module. Like he should have a group of people that are interested in maintaining XML RPC, helping and working on it with them. So that's a good candidate for removing. But we didn't have a plan back then when he first converted it and put it into his own repository.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments?
There was some discussion about a discussion forum through the emails and GitHub issues. Would somebody like to expound upon that for everyone else, maybe? Or
okay. So in GitHub, we were talking about trying to find a place for people to have conversations about Backdrop. And we decided that we were going to use Stack Exchange for questions and answers so that we didn't have to have support requests in our GitHub issue queues. But somebody brought up the point that if you ask questions like, what's your favorite Backdrop theme, those get removed from Stack Exchange. It isn't a place for conversations, it's just a place for questions and answers. So then the issue became, where are we going to have conversations about Backdrop? Like, where do we have a place to put, what's your favorite theme? Are we going to say, people should have this conversation on Twitter or put it on your own blog? Or are we going to provide a place for those conversations to happen, even if it's something that already exists? Like Discus, I think, was something that was recommended as an option for having those conversations.
Yeah, Discourse, I think, is...
Discourse.
Yeah. Although, I don't think we've reached any real solid conclusions about that yet. But yeah, there is an ongoing issue about, where does just general chat happen, like general discussion. And I haven't posted this back to that issue yet, although I have left some feedback, that the original poster, Doc Wilmot, actually kind of proved an interesting point that he was trying to get involved, but he couldn't find a place to actually just post general discussion. So then he had to go and root out the issue queue on GitHub and then post a question on GitHub instead, which actually in some ways was kind of beneficial. That it's like, well, if there are fewer places to go, then you're more likely to end up in the right place to begin with. Maybe. I don't know. So yeah, we do need to find a place for general discussion. But
I'm not sure that GitHub is the right place for that question, though.
Right.
That's the thing. And I also think that we're going to run into this issue where there's so much gray area between like support request, discussion, feature requests, like trying to delineate one goes one place and one goes the other place is going to be really hard, because we aren't going to be able to say, oh, this shouldn't be on GitHub, it should be on Stack Exchange. Transfer issue to Stack Exchange is not an option, right? So I think like setting too many rules about where things happen is going to be hard. I think what's going to happen naturally is that people who have questions are going to ask them on Stack Exchange, and people who have bug reports are going to put them on GitHub, and probably everyone else will put them everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think maybe we should just say, if you have a blog, you're going to put it on your blog anyway, and that's fine. That's why we have Google or Bing or whatever you use to search the internet, is because everything's going to end up everywhere. And if people want to start a Backdrop specific area on Discourse, they can do that, and people will, whether we want them to or not. And so I think just letting people do what they do naturally is fine. Having people ask questions in the GitHub queue is probably also fine, because that's where most of us are right now. But I don't necessarily think we need to have a sanctioned location for any of these things, because people will do what they want anyway.
Yeah, so it's mostly a matter of, do we want to provide a place for people to use, or do we just let it organically, just wherever people post, they post. So
I think having guidelines of like, if you have questions, ask them on Stack Exchange is useful, because then people in the queue can say, oh, this should be asked on Stack Exchange, or here's an answer on Stack Exchange or something. But I don't think that we should build a forum specifically for Backdrop. I think we should let people do that wherever they want to do it.
Yeah, well, at least for the time being, like our community is so small that it's not the most immediate priority.
So I know, Andy, that's not a lot of help, but it is useful to at least talk about it.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying, because since the Backdrop motto is small business and nonprofits and so forth. You know, like when you come into the Drupal community, it's like you must answer all your questions on IRC, but which contributes to the developer-centric Drupalism world. But if Backdrop maybe wants to migrate back a little back from that,
Yeah, it needs a more accessible place. Yeah. And actually, between these tools that we've got right now, we've got IRC, GitHub, and Stack Exchange, all of which are very developer-y centric. I mean, none of those are super friendly to end users. So I think that's a really valid point. So.
Okay, thanks.
Would it be worth discussing adding a web IRC client on like Backdrop's website, like a support section that's like, here's a web client?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like even that, I mean, just dropping somebody into an IRC channel isn't particularly helpful either. It's not like I don't know, most web-based chat rooms that I see, I expect that when I join a chat, I'm going to get somebody talking to me personally, yeah, as opposed to just dropping someone into a middle of a chat room in which they need to say, hello, can anyone hear me, while a bunch of text scrolls by is actually detrimental.
And people in there going, don't say hello, just ask your question.
Yeah, exactly. Unfriendly people like in a group chat, as opposed to, if you join a chat on web pages today, like you expect that someone will initiate a chat with you and immediately ask you like what your problem is, We
could totally set up an IRC bot to do that too. That we can have Backbot say, hello, welcome to Backdrop's IRC channel. If you have a question, and like hello in your username, right? Hello, random person 1234. If you have a question, I don't know. It's not nice. I agree.
As a customer of some company, does that make you feel like they actually care? What is your question? How can I sell you something today? Have you guys considered, I know this is just very radical, but just having an email list?
We actually have
so radical.
We were talking about that, and he's like, what is wrong with email? Like, seriously, guys, like, email lists have been around for forever. And the one thing that we have that's a little bit negative about the email thing is that it ends up being private, whereas something like IRC channel can be logged and you can search it. Like, you can't ever search anyone else's email, so if you missed, like, the first 18 threads in a conversation.
Way back in time, if you set up Mailman, I mean, all of the Drupal.org lists are logged. The fact that anytime anybody asks a question, they're told that that's the wrong list, they should never ask a question via email, is a little ridiculous, but that, you can see the log of that happening over and over again every month. But, yeah, I mean, you can have public email lists, and email is a pretty easily accessible, universally used tool.
So I was a member of the Berkeley Drupal email list, and I felt like that was really valuable. But I never felt that being on the Drupal.org lists were valuable. I think just because the volume, like it just didn't scale well enough. Like the Berkeley list, I think ended up only being about 50 people, and so it was manageable to read the emails and respond to the emails when people had questions you could answer. But the volume of email that I got from Drupal was so ridiculous that I just set them all up to archive and was like, one day I'll read them. And I never did. And even though like those email lists get like archived in a way that you can search them on the web, like a lot of times you're looking for answers and you come up across like Google's mailing list results, I find them hard to manage. Like the fact that some people's email clients like copy the email messages in different orders than others. I don't know. It felt like I feel like there's got to be a better solution. We've been doing this long enough, surely.
I think you're totally right about the critical mass.
The archiving is never great.
Yeah, the critical mass issue, once it reaches a certain size, email is no longer useful. But if it was just, getting started with Backdrop, and then once you were up and running, the conversations moved to a logical place, that might be much easier and user-friendly than an IRC web interface.
Yeah, I think making it accessible via the web is probably the most important thing. And yes, I mean, there's crufty old software like Mailman. You know, at one point, you know, Google Groups was actually pretty good, but they kind of locked down their email capabilities recently, which has been kind of frustrating. But yeah, somehow we need to make it accessible via the web. That's probably the most important thing. Something like, oh, you're just getting started, like, you know, community.backdropcms.org or something like that. Some place where people can just post.
Well, now we're getting back into the area of, you know, do we want to build something for this?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I think we need to look at more things. I'm checking out, like I'm looking at Discus right now, or Discourse, excuse me. I don't know. Like if you know, if we want to make it so that you know, we build this in Drupal again, like basically a forum. I don't know.
Well, we removed forum module from core. We could write a case study on how to build a forum without using like taxonomy and content types. But you don't need a forum. Okay. Well, I think it's definitely worth discussing. It would be good to have something that everyone could have access to. I feel like everybody already knows how to use their emails. There's definitely some upsides to that. I also feel like you know, having something very Stack Exchange-like, where all you have to do is, like, you know, Yahoo Answers style, type in your question and get answers, is easier for people who are not developers to use, but it's also like Stack Exchange itself is a very developer-focused tool. So I don't know if Discourse is more or less developer-focused, and that's something that people would use anyway. I just feel like saying, okay, well, you know, you need a GitHub account if you're going to create a bug report, but you need a Discourse account if you want to have a conversation, but you need to have a Backdrop CMS account if you want to, like, register a project, is kind of already starting to, like, break things up in a way that isn't very intuitive, where I feel like, you know, the reason we went with GitHub is because all of our developers already have a GitHub account, and, like, you know, you don't need to create a Backdrop account unless you want to register your project, I think is valid. But now saying, if we just want to ask a question, I don't know. We need, I think email is definitely easiest, but we are going to run up with this scale issue. So maybe just having like an introductory getting started with Backdrop email list would be good. But yeah, it would be good to have someone who's responsible for actually managing that in terms of making sure questions get answered. So it's not just a whole bunch of questions and then people getting angry. But yeah, having more gateways to getting less developer-focused people to success, I think, is going to be important. Problems need solving.
Okay, well, we'll continue. I don't know. There's already that issue in the backdropcms.org queue, and I think just further discussion there. Let's continue on the internets.
Okay. I know Doug Van just joined us. Hi, Doug.
Hello, everybody.
So Doug sent me an email this morning that was basically requesting us help him write up a proposal for funding, which is something that I think is something that we can think about too, like in a bigger scale, not just his particular request, but in general. We have said in our project philosophy that we believe in paying core developers, but in order to pay core developers, we need to have money and we need to have core developers. So trying to come up with ways to get both of those things, I think, are important. So, Doug, I'm not sure if the time for having this conversation is on this particular call, but I think that it's good to talk about it now in kind of this live broadcast format and say, like, we do need to think about if we're going to be paying core developers, where that money is coming from, how we're going to be getting proposals out to people who might want to give us money, how to properly encourage people who believe in the product to invest in it, and that's definitely food for thought. So, Doug, maybe we should talk I know Nate and I have to leave here in the next 15 minutes, but later this afternoon, or I'll respond to your email, and we can set up a time to have a more private conversation about your particular suggestion. But yeah, especially with Backdrop coming out soon, it will be good to have a plan for how we're going to support this long term in terms of hiring developers and getting them paid. We made a little bit of money from our Indiegogo campaign last year. We haven't had anything to spend it on yet other than hosting, or we haven't been spending it yet on anything other than hosting. I guess we've got lots of opportunities, but we're not just throwing the money around here. So we should figure out some actual plan for what that looks like, and probably public too. That'll say this is our plan for spending that money and any money in the future in terms of hiring developers and similar. That'd be good. Is there anything else we should add before we wrap this meeting? I know, Doug, you just joined, so if you wanted to add anything else.
Let's do it all over again real quick.
Backdrop, woohoo! Okay.
But I will be seeing you guys in Iowa. Looking very forward to that.
Oh, great. Corn camp.
Yeah.
Dribble corn, you mean?
Oh, yeah. Dribble corn.
Okay. Well, I think let's call it a wrap then. And yeah, we'll be in IRC for the next little while, Jen and I, that is. But then we'll be back again this evening and going Backdrop all night. So
there's a song in there somewhere. Backdrop all night.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and we'll talk again next week.
See ya.
All right. Bye, guys.